his new film. So I'm Jenny Beale, and I'm standing in for Bill today. So we're studying You Are the Happiness You Seek by Rupert Spira, and we've reached chapter 16, Take Refuge in the Now. And I'm delighted to be joined today by my co-host, Marlene Reisman. Hi, Marlene. Lovely to be with you today.
Jenny, it's lovely to meet you. I've seen you a few times.
Right. So Marlene has been studying with Rupert for a few years now, and she loves this book. This is the first book that she's read of his, but she's enjoying it very much. So it will be great to have you here today, Marlene, and to hear your insights into this chapter. So where would you like to start?
I guess I'd like to start with the title itself.
Right.
Refuge in the Now. The word refuge, of course, means a safe place, a shelter, a comfortable abiding, I would say. And to have the comfort in the now is, not running from what's here, what's immediate. So just even contemplating the title alone gives a sense of the moment. And I'm just happy to be here with everyone and happy to be in a quiet place, even though this is a new experience for me. And the words of the title, the quote, and the whole chapter are really an intervention almost. He uses the word addiction, even for thinking. And I see his work as an intervention in, the way our minds run off, the way we are familiar, taking ourselves to be something other than being a refuge in what's present, in awareness. So reading the quote by Lao Tzu, the master arrives without leaving, sees the light without looking, achieves without doing a thing. Without doing a thing, nothing to do, nowhere to go. And the doer and the deed are in alignment. So there's an effortlessness about being here with activity that is very beautiful learning and connects to the chapter in a number of ways, not running away from what's here in the moment.
Yes. As I like your use of intervention. That's beautiful, because our conditioning, we sometimes think our conditioning is a problem, and that we're kind of stuck with it. But actually, reading the book, attending retreats, all just being together as we are now is in itself a reconditioning, and it's that reconditioning so that changes the way our minds work, doesn't it?
It's a welcome interruption.
Yeah.
To use the word addiction for something thinking, which is such a very common way that we move from what's absolutely here. Of course, there's value in thinking in lots of ways, but to hear that thinking is the most common form of addiction that takes us away from what's here. I guess I could say we're all in this together, because it's something we all really know, and how common it is really, I feel support of just being here with everyone, knowing the commonality we have in that addiction. And so to begin moving towards the refuge of the now, Rupert takes us to what it really is to have that addiction to thinking. So on the first page, he says it is a way of resisting our current experience that is so subtle that we don't notice we're doing it. So we don't notice we're gone from our awareness with that busy mind that is often there.
Yes. Of course, he explains that there are many types of thinking that are non-egoic. They don't come from a sense of separation. But the sort of thinking he's talking about here is thinking that is aimed just at distracting us from the current circumstances which we feel are in some way insufficient.
Right. I guess we could say the identified or separate self is doing the thinking in the case that he's talking about up front.
In a sense, maybe, but I think at a deeper level, there's an understanding that the separate self is a complete fiction. That ignorance is not something which we choose. The ignorance is an activity of the universe, and it happens by itself from time to time in a body mind and goes away again. So it's sort of part of a pattern of the universe, but that pattern changes as we come much more in contact with this teaching, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And while we might have to notice again and again and again that our thinking has gotten us lost and away from what's really here, what we're aware of, it does seem cumulative that over time there's more of awareness that sees it. So even something subtle like thinking becomes more apparent.
Yes.
At one point, towards the bottom of the page, he says, thinking isn't bad for our health, or at least not overtly so, or not illegal. So it's the default avenue of escape for most people. We know this if we're running to the fridge all the time. We know running to the fridge all the time. We know this if we're drinking more than feels good. We notice addictions like that, where it's a bit hard to notice the thinking addiction when it's thoughts that are telling us that we're lacking something, telling the thoughts that are not the background and the source of who we are. And while it's not harmful, as he says, it's certainly not helpful because it's a filter on our awareness of being here. And it takes us from the now, from presence.
Yes. And if we go on to the next page, 126, I've got the book, then he says, if he goes on to describe the remedy. In fact, if we want relief from our suffering, all that's required is to return from our happiness-seeking adventure in the past and the future and come back to our current experience. We must return to the now, where previously we thought to escape from our present suffering into a future which we believed held the promise of happiness. Instead, we take refuge in the now, the only place suffering cannot stand. And in this way, we find at the very heart of our experience the happiness we previously sought by avoiding it.
Yeah, I highlighted that very sentence too.
Yeah.
Our heart's desire to get to the root cause of our suffering and be free it really does lead us to that determination and that love for what's real. Helps us get away from escapes into past that's no longer what's our experience in the moment or future. And our sense of lack is underscored by escapes into what was or what will be, because we think it's not okay to be here with what is right here. And
I think quite often when we do come back into the now, then we are actually brought straight back to that sense of lack which we were trying to escape. And when that happens, we do need to look into that sense of lack deeply with sincerity, with complete sincerity, and with the sort of openness of a scientist. What do I feel myself to be in this moment? Not what I generally believe, because I've been told by a teacher that I am pure consciousness. Not that, but what do I actually feel myself to be in this moment? What evidence do I have right now that I'm a separate entity? What evidence do I have right now that I lack anything? So not going back to a non-dual belief or a past experience, looking at the right now.
The very last sentence on that page, I found myself pausing. The one that starts "one who," there might be other things on 126, but the sentence "one who" that goes to the next page understands okay, maybe I'll read the whole paragraph starting at the bottom of the page. "The only reason we are not at peace and filled with joy now is that circumstances don't conform to our idea of how they're supposed to be, of how they should be. We think that we need to strategize to control events." But he goes on to say, one who understands this aligns what they want with what they have, and rather than trying to conform what they have to what they want. And when I just sat for a moment in the sense of aligning what I have and breathed into what I have as what I want, I just felt an enormous peacefulness. And it really was a beautiful way to be with the book, I found, is to take a moment to breathe into something that really resonates. And this acceptance of what is and being in alignment with it gave me a moment of understanding, a way to be with the material. That the peacefulness just arose. And it seems like a gap between the seeker and what is sought just closed.
Yeah. I think that can happen, but there are times when there are things that we don't like in our surroundings, and I think it's very important then not to try to manipulate your experience, not to try to superimpose any non-dual belief on what you think or say or do. It's all about self-honesty and clear understanding. My own approach is to say there are some things that are within the scope of this body mind to change, and there are some things which aren't. And there's absolutely no problem allowing the body mind to change anything that's within its power to change, if it doesn't hurt others or hurt the planet in any way, or animals. So there's no problem with surrounding yourself with people who are nice to be with, and keeping away from those who are less nice to be with. But it doesn't make any sense at all. It's irrational to feel angry, upset, hurt about the things we can't change. It's simply stupid. So there's something very logical about that, and I think it's actually seeing the logic of that can be really helpful when people get into difficult situations.
Yeah. Somehow it's coming up for me now. It came up when I was reading this chapter, and I remember responding to Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah, the line that says, "There's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter what you heard, the broken or the holy hallelujah." So it's being present to what's broken, which takes a lot of courage at times.
Yes.
And see, but there's a way that a connection to our awareness gives us more and more, increasingly, time and time again, moving away from avoiding what we don't like, but like time and time again saying yes to both the broken hallelujah and the holy hallelujah, instead of saying, no, I'll only take the holy, I'll only take awareness, I'll only take the holiness. No, not that. And
yes, it's when we can't change it. There's a lovely story that Jean Klein told about someone who came to one of his meetings, and she asked him, she said, I was sitting on a park bench and I was just meditating, and I was being really quiet, and it was wonderful. And then this group of very loud youths came along, and they made an awful noise really close to me, and they were really not very nice. But I just sat there and I meditated, and then eventually I walked away. Was that the right thing to do? And he said, well, it's a possibility, but I would have walked away right away. And I think there's a practical aspect to this teaching as well, which says that, because sometimes it can be colluding with egoic activities if we kind of stay with them and say, oh, it's okay, I'm staying with this. As someone behaving badly, if there's an opportunity to go away, then you're not colluding anymore.
Self-care in some cases.
Yes.
It feels like the biggest self-care is really noticing, being aware of those kinds of events that occur. And he, Rupert, on the top of page 127, he goes to, there are no problems.
Yes.
That circumstances are not problematic. They're just themselves. From the perspective of awareness, there are situations from the perspective of awareness, there are situations. For the ego, there are problems. And it's our resistance that turns the situation into a problem.
Yes, exactly.
And we have to, have kindness when there is resistance also. And because sometimes we need to just really take it slow in going into something that perhaps was a trauma or that was a very difficult situation. But it's like I've noticed that my thought processes tend to be circuitous and repeat themselves. So catching some of the repetitions about, oh no, what if this doesn't work out, or worrying when there's nothing really to worry about, but just something my mind is doing. Just catching that is just something else really does happen.
Yes, I think that's an important point, to just allow the activity, the response to flow spontaneously. And if it works out well, that's great. If it doesn't, that's great also. It's fine. And there's absolutely no point in thinking, oh, is it going to be all right? Have I done the right thing? Oh, perhaps I should have done something different, etc.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to do, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. A friend of mine often says, well, maybe nothing has gone wrong.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
A paragraph that I underlined is the third one under "There are no problems."
Mm-hmm.
He said, Rupert says, and just as space is never harmed or destroyed by anything that takes place within it, so we, awareness, are never hurt or overwhelmed by anything that takes place in experience. We, awareness, are open to all experience, allowing all experience without resistance, defenseless and yet indestructible. A refuge, I would call that.
Yes.
Openness without resistance is what we are, not what we do. At the bottom of the next paragraph.
Yes, I think that's very important, because we don't choose our thoughts. Therefore, we don't choose our actions. Therefore, nobody else chooses their thoughts. Nobody else chooses their actions either. It's all the integrated, completely integrated play of the universe.
So much acceptance in what you just said.
Yeah.
Important, I think, too, is the paragraph that starts with the resistance to what is appears in the form of a single thought. I don't want what's present. I want what's not present. All suffering is caused by that thought alone. As soon as that thought rises up in between ourself and our experience of the world, our innate happiness is veiled and suffering ensues. In the absence of any resistance to experience, the peace and happiness that is our very nature simply shines by itself. This openness without resistance to all experience is not a state of the mind. It's the natural condition of the mind in the absence of seeking and resisting. Happiness is the nature of the mind. Suffering is a state of the mind. It feels so good to, kind of abide in these kinds of things repeatedly as an intervention we were talking about in the addiction to thought processes that are not supportive of that peaceful, restful home that we learn to live in over time.
Yes. Going on to the next page. 128, yes. He says it's our own resistance to experience in the form of thinking and feeling that closes us off from the ever-present background of our innate joy, just as clouds obscure the blue sky. So thinking and feeling, that's something that if we're open to, we just allow it to flow through us. We don't try to get rid of thinking or feeling. That never works. We just allow it to flow through. We don't we don't grab hold, as you said, of circling thoughts, or we don't focus on negative feelings. And
Yeah, no resistance to the clouds.
yes,
The cloud, no resistance to our openness, like simply our openness in the next paragraph, without resistance to the current situation, even when the current situation is clouds. And that's when it takes a bit of, practice until we get it. Yeah.
yes, it's about allowing the
Yeah.
clouds, because the clouds are only apparent obscuring. The clouds can be there while the happiness is there at the same time.
Right.
The clouds can still
Yeah.
be around. He
Yeah.
says every moment of happiness is a window in our experience onto the ever-present background of our essential being, whose nature is happiness itself. And that happiness can be present at the same time as all sorts of thoughts and feelings, but somehow it just allows them to flow through and doesn't grab hold of them.
Yeah. Our allegiance changes. Over time, it feels like, we're not caught in what's going on with the clouds,
Yeah,
all the busyness of that. And they're there. And there's also a way of being
yeah,
that is the sky beyond, beneath.
and I think there's a paragraph about halfway down the page, which I think is perhaps the most important paragraph in this chapter. The nature of our being is peace and joy itself, all that is necessary in order to access ourself. And as a result, its innate peace and joy is to come back to our own being again and again, and to stand of that as that in the face of all experience. And then he says further down the page, situations that were once met with resistance or emotional reactivity are now welcomed as an opportunity to understand the extent to which we have invested our happiness in objective experience. Instead of frustrating our search for happiness in the world, such situations cooperate with the revelation of the peace and happiness that is the very nature of our being. And I think we've all had situations in our lives which have been traumatic in some way. But when we look back on them, we see that really we learned so much from them that we would never want it to have been in any other way. We wouldn't want anything else to have happened, either anything else that we did or anything else that anyone else did. That everything was exactly right to lead us to the happiness we have now.
So much trust in just what occurs is so apparent in this. Yeah. And it feels to me, my experience seems to be that our true nature is revealed sometimes, most of all, having gone through something like that. I remember being on a silent retreat a couple of years ago, and I was dealing with some difficulty. I think I was rejecting my ego altogether. I was like, couldn't tolerate all the thoughts actually that felt like they were just pouring in. And my head felt like cement. It felt like a rock. And I said, I have to leave the retreat. I can't tolerate this. It felt completely intolerable. And I was very upset that I couldn't go beyond them. And the pain of that experience changed everything. I was like, what? All of a sudden, everything just left that was haunting me. And, there was just a spaciousness. And I was shocked. And I started saying, oh, it's true. I was just really, I couldn't, one of the things in the chapter, Rupert says a very, very strong event that's painful or one that's very happy can sort of break through our humdrum way of being with things. And that was one that just, really, it was like a volcano erupted, and there was nothing that was keeping me trapped in that moment. And it's memorable. Yeah.
So shall we go on to the question at the bottom of page 128? There are some situations that I find so hurtful that I cannot stay open to them or to the person involved. Should I just accept such situations? And he says it's important to recognize whether our response to such a situation arises on behalf of truth, love, and justice, or on behalf of a hurt self. If the latter, then it is legitimate to take any action that may be appropriate to bring intelligence and love to bear on the situation. And in many religions, there's an instruction to turn the other cheek, but it's not always appropriate. If we give in to and support egoic behavior such as bullying, gaslighting, put downs, then we're colluding with ignorance. And that's not acting on behalf of truth, love, and justice. Sometimes the right action is just to be silent and walk away. And sometimes it's to respond firmly. But what's really important is not to take it personally. In other words, to see that there's no persons involved. There's no person trying to hurt. And even though it might seem that way, and no person that can be hurt. It's just a situation that's arisen in the universe from the activity of universal consciousness. So whatever your response is, it needs to come from the understanding of your true identity. And my experience, it comes spontaneously.
Yeah, we become more and more of our kind of collusion with suffering. He talks later on about seeing, how we get caught in it and project it onto ourselves or onto others or onto situations. Mm-hmm. So that there's repeating situations that we can actually catch. Until this is clear, he says, in the third from the bottom paragraph in this section, apparently problematic situations will continue to occur in our life, provoking and testing us until we have understood their message. And as you were saying earlier, Jenny, there is a message in so many of the things that happen to us, even the more traumatic ones. Mm-hmm. And when we're awake to those messages, the repetition, we see it. It's still there. The cloud might be hovering around, but it's not grabbing us the way it had.
See, it's the sort of attachment he's talking about it, attachment to people, because we expect or demand that they be a source of happiness for us. And that kind of attachment tends to be hidden from us until problems arise. So attachment to our partner, other members of our family, our teacher, close friends. We tend to have expectations of all of these. And sometimes those expectations are not met. And whatever the attachment, somehow or other, it's likely to come to the surface eventually. It might take many, many years. You know, you might be with your partner for many years before any problems arise. But when the problems do arise, then that's an opportunity for freedom from that attachment. Might be upsetting at the time, but just seeing that upset for what it is, that we've been investing our happiness in a person or a relationship, and just seeing that sets us free.
Yeah. As he said, what you were just saying, next to the last paragraph, when this has been understood, we cease using the world for the sake of our happiness, our relationships, our objects, and start using our happiness for the sake of the world. I just love that.
That's beautiful, isn't it? Yes, yes.
Just as the world previously appeared to us in the form of circumstances that mirrored our inner state of resistance, so now the world will realign itself with our new attitude of openness. Yeah. It's so funny how, the glasses with which we see the world are very effective. I used to think that, the world coming in and supporting us as we become more open. Years ago, I thought that was some sort of new age kind of statement, but it's so true that, if we take off the dark glasses or the rose-colored glasses with which we look at what's around us and respond to circumstances, there's just such a very different way of knowing and trusting that reality is there to give us what we need and support us, and then we can be there for it. The world isn't our parents anymore. It's not our boyfriend. It's not our girlfriend. It's not our way of, being rescued. It's our happiness is known.
Yes, we are the world.
Be a gift.
Yeah,
we are the world.
Yeah. So then there's another question at the start of the next section: becoming established in and as our true nature. And the question is, ever since I first became aware of awareness in the background of my experience, I seem to travel back and forth between it and my thoughts and feelings in the foreground. This gives me a moment of respite from the suffering that I used to experience almost continually, but I long for lasting peace. And I think that's such a common question. I think it stems from the idea that the peace of awareness can only be experienced in the absence of thoughts, but that's not the case. Being aware is not a state of mind. It's an understanding. It's a recognition of our true identity, our true being.
And the moving in and out happens. And he gives an analogy with a woman who was living in the city, and she moved into the country to find peace, because nature afforded her that. But it's and that was just really an analogy for, the moving in and out that we do
Yeah.
of where we identify, where we place our allegiance, or where we abide. And sometimes they're just brief escapes into something that is so expansive and beautiful, like the country, like nature. And then something else happens, and we get closer to what that experience is of and I usually get it through my body, through breath, and through just sensing in, like Rupert's yoga is
Mm.
so valuable, and just quieting. And then it seems like the country, what we see as the piece of the country, moves in, and we're not separate from it.
Yes. Yes. I don't know whether it was possible in the retreats you went to, but often at Rupert's retreats in the UK, we used to go for walks in the countryside together. Several of us would go out and up into the mountains, and it was very beautiful.
Yeah.
And it does have a lovely quieting effect.
Yeah. Kind of, I remember feeling one with a tree, with a particular tree for some reason. I was like, oh, you knew it all along, didn't you? And I live in New York, and his retreats are in Garrison, New York, and it is along the Hudson River, and there are mountains and trails. So we, on this side of the pond, get to do that too.
Yes, lovely. Yes. So on page 130, he says, in time, our true nature of awareness will cease being something that we seem to visit from time to time, and will be understood and felt simply to be what we are. To be knowingly the presence of awareness will become our natural condition, and no effort will be required either to return there or to maintain it. It will become our new identity. We move in, we live there as that. And it's not only that no effort will be required, actually any effort will get in the way, I think.
Yeah. Noticing becomes, I think, less and less of an effort. It seems that once we catch our escapes from, they become more and more able to show up for us and allow something else to be revealed that's truer, not transient.
Yes. So we should look at just there are some points on the chat that perhaps we've I like this one from Rick. It's early on, 18 minutes past the hour. Some non-dual teachings actually suggest trying to be more in the now. This may be an effective interim pointer for some, but it still implies an effort, however subtle. Alternatively, I suggest a more accurate pointer. You are the now, full stop. There is no in or out of the now. You are it. And
the immediacy of that is wonderful.
I think that's very important. Thanks. So thank you, Rick, for that. I mean, it's time really doesn't exist even from the point of view of physics. It's not seen as a primary attribute of the universe, of reality, of all that is. So in a sense, past and present past and future are illusory, and all there is present. No, there is nothing. There is nothing else.
Yeah. That's why the word the power of now has
Yes.
in our circles. It's very powerful.
Catherine says, I find Rupert's speaking and writings do not include the words stupid or ignorance, only because he does not find them useful in the teaching, especially new readers, due to the reactions they bring. This is a kindness to me for those new. I'm sorry for those who are new to the teaching. I think I've sort of seen this group as being fairly well established in it, but they are words which I think those who've been to Francis meetings know very well are used quite often. So I'm afraid they slipped out. But my apologies for that, for anyone that's new and felt upset by it. But if you do feel upset by it, then that's something to look at. What does ignorance really mean? Ignorance means ignoring. It comes from ignoring. Stupid means irrational, doing something that doesn't make sense. And if we have been ignoring our true nature, if we have been doing things that don't make sense, then maybe that's worth looking at. Why? What's led us to that? So that's just my thoughts on that. Another point from Rick says acceptance or welcoming does not mean that no action will be evoked. The difference, the action, if any, will be impersonal in nature, and that's what's really important. Impersonal doesn't mean that you're only thinking of other people and not thinking of your own body mind, not at all. Impersonal means universal, that you're taking into account the what's best in this moment for the universe as you understand it. So that's important. But there's another aspect of impersonal, which is which actually goes back to the Bhagavad Gita, where it says there, don't be attached to the fruit of actions. It doesn't say don't act. Bhagavad Gita is very much about acting, but don't be attached to the fruit of of your actions. And it's the same, an impersonal action. We allow the action to happen. We allow our body mind to take that action, but we don't mind if it doesn't get the results that we expected it to. It's okay. It's fine. It was the impersonal action. It was the best we were able to do in that moment now.
Yeah, flowing with what our inner understanding in the moment is, and being with it and not be caught up in results or trying to strategize to get a certain result. There's a way that we can release that and understand that there's an all-encompassing way of settling in to the now, settling into reality, and having that just be there. And we're part of it. We're part of that flow of the now and the now and the now and the now.
Yes. And there's a nice comment from Amy. Francis speaks of being on the razor's edge with our benevolent presence, allowing all that arises in experience. I love that. All arises in benevolent experience now. The razor's edge is allowing the experience, being the experience, but not becoming it or identifying personally with it. That's perfect, Amy. Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, it is lovely. Not grabbing it, owning it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I like your comment, Rick, to be in the flow as an impersonal action, doing the next logical thing. Yes, absolutely. We don't put our minds to sleep. We allow the mind to analyze the situation and find the next logical thing. That's fine, but it doesn't. That analysis doesn't come from a sense of separation.
Yeah, there's so much being in that. Mind, heart, being with.
Yeah. So what stood out for you on page 130, Marlene?
130.
Yes.
That whole idea of the however paragraph, is that the one you just read? In time.
Yes, we talked about the woman living in the small apartment.
Yeah.
Yes.
We move in, we live there as that. That's the one that you read that
Yes.
really stood out for me most of all. And also, if we go to the bottom of the page, he speaks about a closed fist being an unnatural condition. The hand is naturally open and relaxed. However, a hand which has been clenched for some time will become accustomed to the new position, which, if maintained, will seem to become its new norm. In order to return to the hand to its natural position of openness and relaxation, an effort will be initially required. So I think we've been talking a bit about that there's some effort initially required. So we're just not absorbed in a or circuitous way of being with ourselves. And but it's a thrilling effort, actually. It's a thrilling effort.
I remember at a meeting in Oxford many years ago, and Rupert actually got someone to clench his fist, and he said, just keep it clenched and until I say let it go. And so they were continuing on this conversation for about 15 minutes, and the guy still had his fist clenched. And then he said, now open your fist. And he could see that it was now an effort, because his fist was so accustomed to being closed, because he'd had it closed and tightly closed for all that time. It was quite difficult to open it. So it was quite a good example.
That's a great example. And all that time was a few minutes, not a lifetime of conditioning.
Yes,
so that's
exactly.
Some effort is needed. And we think that all that conditioning is who we are until we learn otherwise.
Yes.
And sometimes it's hard to say, I know you. You're not the whole story. You're a story, and I see you, and I feel accepting. I feel compassion for you, and I'm here as awareness as well.
Yes. And regarding effort, Rick has said actions that stem from interest really can't be said to be an effort. Soft effort at the most. And I think this again goes back to a deeper teaching, which is that there is no effort. All effort comes from a separate identity. What drives everything we do is interest and love. So there's no real effort, because we're doing what we're interested in. And then instead of practice, which is what it's how people usually begin on the spiritual path, with an awful lot of practice, and all the progressive paths are very much about practice and lots of different practices. But then instead of, you replace practice with the idea of experiments, and you do experiments because you're interested, because you want to find out, and so the path becomes effort-free and very much more fun and enjoyable as you go further along, which I hope is reassuring for people, because sometimes, when people first come to this teaching, they do regard it as a huge effort. They as a friend of mine who's died now, but she used to run a group that I went to, which was studying a progressive form of Advaita Vedanta. And she said, she used to say to me, it takes a huge effort for me to sit down in silence. I'm only really happy when the radio's on. And she said she had the radio on most of the day, and she's only really happy when that was on, and it required an enormous effort to just sit in silence. And it was interesting, towards the end of her life. I was visiting her when she was dying. We used to sit in silence, and she said, it's absolutely okay now. It's completely effortless, and it's totally amazing. And that really showed me how hard it can be for people sometimes.
And then what happened to her, and what happens is there's no live curiosity, a desire to really sense what's really here. And it's so much more, there's so much more awakeness in the now. There's so much more life in discovering what appears as it appears, and not something that's stale or some fantasy about what's not here. So it becomes a pleasure. And there's one thing about getting old, I think, that happens. Maybe it's not just aging, but it's getting more closer and closer to who we really are, as some part of our tension of life relaxes, and maybe we have more time to be with what's here. But I just thought of Bob Dylan's line, I'm getting so much younger. I'm younger than that now. There's some kind of an alive curiosity that feels like an uncovering of something that has been long hidden. So there are treasures to be sort of pulled out as that relaxation of our doing earlier life settles into something where there's just so much here to be experienced, and as well as the world is closer and others are closer, as we're not so engaged in the busyness of day to day.
Yes, I think it can be the pressures of holding down a job and having a a career. They even if we are at the same time following some kind of spiritual teaching, they are distracting. And after we retire and we have freedom to do what we really enjoy, then things do become easier. But it's interesting to see sometimes, certainly in Francis retreats, there are quite a number of young people who are at an early stage in their career. They've been out of university a few years, and somehow they're still finding a way of combining that with quiet time and with what they really love.
There were a good number of young people at the last retreat, and I was sort of excited for them to be understanding
yes,
something like these teachings at a young age. It's a beautiful thing to see and enjoy along with them.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I was just looking at the last page.
Yes, on page 131. Yeah.
Yeah. The third from the bottom paragraph says, in time as we become accustomed to resting in or as being, less and less effort will be required because the habit of losing ourselves in or identifying ourselves with the object content of experience will have become weakened by practice. Just as a rocket requires less energy to navigate space once it has escaped the gravitational pull of the Earth. So the gravitational pull of being, of our awareness becomes greater than the gravitational pull of the content of our experience and the content of our mind.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And it's just a pleasure to, have that available. And I feel the intervention of this book and this chapter is, and what we're all doing here together is such a beautiful intervention on being here for the reality of awareness.
It's interesting. He towards the end of this chapter, he mentions practice quite a lot, and certainly when I first went to his teaching, practice was a word that as soon as you uttered it, you were told not to practice. My very first meeting with him, I asked, well, what should I'd had a really wonderful glimpse my true nature, which had lasted many months. And I said, what do I need to practice to get back to that? And he said, give up every single one of the practices that you are currently doing. That's what you need. Yeah. And just do whatever you most want to do in this moment now, whether it's watching a silly movie, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's having dinner with friends, or whether it's sitting down and enjoying the silence of yourself, or whatever it is, but never practice. And that, so I was quite surprised. I think this is the first book that I've come across of his where he has emphasized practice, but I realized afterwards why he has. That some years ago, when he was first putting his new website together, he said that which I was involved in, he said, I want people to come to, I want it to attract people to this teaching who would never dreamed of doing anything like this, of doing any kind of spirituality. So he's wanting a completely new and completely fresh audience. And I think I think practice is really a way in, and that's really the reason why the majority, or I think probably all, of the progressive paths do involve practice. So I think he's recognized that, and recognized that for people who are completely new, then practice is needed. But quite quickly we give up any need. We find that there is never really any need for, for practice.
Yeah. What's here kind of happens without us.
Yeah. Yes. There's a you're reading Being Aware of Being Aware. So I'll just quote a little bit about that too. This is from chapter 5. There is no pathway from ourself to ourself, from awareness to awareness. Having no room for a path, and therefore no room for a practice, there is no room for a practitioner or a self to travel from awareness to awareness. We could only practice being aware of something apparently other than awareness. Indeed, the separate self or ego exists as the very activity that ensues between awareness and its object. And it's very beautiful, but it also points to the hidden danger of when we practice, that we practice in order to achieve something, achieve an object, and we conceptualize awareness as an object. And so at some point we let go of the effort, we let go of practice, and we just follow our interests, follow our love, and maybe do experiments.
Yeah. Follow our love and surrender to what we know.
Yes.
As now, as here. I see I underlined the next to the last paragraph, so I want to see what it says. At some point, resting as being is felt and understood to be our natural condition. As we abide more and more in ourself, our deep-seated tendencies gradually come to the surface and are dissolved. No practice is needed then. The most constant state of dissatisfaction that seemed to have accompanied us for most of our life simply leaves us without our necessarily even noticing, without doing, without, sometimes we don't even notice, oh, I'm not being gnarled in self-contempt. I'm not being gnarled in lacking. There's just like, there's just a relaxation into something else that through practice, we've learned to know as more of who we are.
Yes.
As who we are. As now, as Rick and you said. And yet there's always an unfolding. I feel like it's like, I remember early on, I say, well, what is it to be enlightened? But I feel like it's a verb, there's like an unfolding that just occurs and occurs and occurs. And there's an active engagement with what's here. And that's the exciting, joyful curiosity and loving what we love, as you just said, and being with ourselves, with it, but with a self that's empty and open and desiring all that is here without the obstacle of thinking we're somebody else.
yes, that really the spiritual path has no end. But once we join it, once we've had a liberating glimpse of our true nature, the path just becomes easy and more joyful.
Yeah, we're accustomed to it. We're not resisting, as he was talking about earlier.
Not resisting, exactly. And as Atmananda Krishna Menon said that, when you're established, when no thoughts, no bodily sensations, no perceptions can take you away from your understanding of what you truly are. Rick says we really don't just stop practice, it kind of burns itself out, our interests and understanding. And I think that's right. I practice a progressive path, loads of practices for many decades, and it had certainly burnt itself out by the time I came to the direct path teaching.
Yes. It's a beautiful way, especially if I've done a whole lot of boring into what was broken. I think that's why that Leonard Cohen affected me so much. That Leonard Cohen about the light in everything that we can actually see. But yeah, it's a wonderful. Sorry, there's a way of that the non-dual path. Is so cleansing of all of that trying and all of that efforting, and there's just like a verticality that happens that just connects us to what we've learned to know as what's here.
Yes.
And I guess that is maybe the refuge of now that is ours. We don't have to move to the country. Even though
it's yes, we don't have to move to the country. I'm in the country. I used to live in the town, but I'm in the country now. And it is lovely to be in the country, but it's wherever you are. Yeah.
If you're there, if we're here.
Yes. Yeah.
And then there's space for our engagement with you, with others, with everyone. Yes. And everything in a way that is not bumpy.
So I think we're coming to the end of our time. As far as I know, Bill will be back next time. I'm not sure who his co-host is going to be next time, but I think he's going to be back. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for all of your comments, and Marlene, thank you so much for being a really great co-host. It's been wonderful to be with you.
It's beautiful to be with you, Jenny, very much so. And I'd like to do a shout out to Bill for helping me do an intervention, because as I read this chapter a few times, it was a wonderful way of feeling very close to the material. And I really appreciate being here with you, Jenny, and with everyone and we're on this path all together, the effortless one. Yes. And it's a pleasure. It's a beautiful experience.
I'll just say that next week, Bill's co-host is Lisa Natoli.
All right, great.
And then I think you're back the week after that, Jenny, aren't you?
I'm not sure. I've had two conflicting dates. There was one that you told me, and there was another that Bill put on the schedule. But we'll find out near the time. So thank you,
So
everyone.
we are the happiness we seek.